The first laugh came the way they always do, too loud from the wrong person at the worst possible time. Captain Mason Riker leaned against the edge of the ready room table with the easy swagger of a man who expected an audience and got one. He flicked a glance toward the far end of the room where a slight, gray-haired woman in a faded flight suit was signing a stack of flight authorization forms. "What's that call sign, Grandma?" he called out. "Seraph 01. Did you fly that thing in the Cold War?" A few pilots chuckled the sound, riding the static of the storm that rattled the windows. The overhead lights blinked, came back on, and the thunder rolled again, long, heavy, and close. The woman did not look up. She finished the last signature, squared the papers with a tap, and set the pen in a perfect line with the clipboard. There was nothing to her face except patient focus, the sort that makes noisy men talk louder. She nodded once to the crew chief waiting by the door and handed over the packet. Across the taxiway behind a wall of glass in the command center, General Thomas Caldwell paused mid-sentence. He had been talking through contingencies with his battle. The ready room itself was a knot of frayed nerves and expensive technology. The base's F-35 sat dark on the ramp in angry, powerless rows. The V-22s were no better caution lights lit like Christmas flight computers, sulking after the freak electromagnetic pulse that had chased the storm across 3 states. The maintenance chief had run the numbers twice, and then a third time, just to be cruel to hope. Every modern bird was grounded by systems that had decided to protect themselves by refusing to work at all. Only one airframe in Caldwell's inventory had shrugged. Parked near the far fence-lined square and unglamorous, the old C-130 Hercules had stared back at the storm like a draft horse in a thunderhead. It didn't know how to be impressed. It had real cables instead of digital moods. Metal rods that connected a pilot's hands to things that moved, pumps that whined when they worked and leaked when they didn't. The young called it a museum piece. Men like Caldwell called it honest. Riker didn't see honesty. He saw embarrassment waiting to happen. Look, he told his chorus of lieutenants, a museum piece and a museum pilot make a match set. He jerked a thumb toward the ramp. We need to send our best, not reenact the History Channel. On another channel, a different voice cut through the noise. The ops desk pushed the microphone closer to the speaker as the remote team fought to keep calm. The words Caldwell hated arrived in a flat tone that refused to admit fear, pinned mortars, walking perimeter collapsing. The follow-on sentence was shorter, stripped of career-saving politeness. Minutes left. Caldwell let the chatter in the room burn itself out, then pointed at the big weather plot where the storm writhed like a living thing. "We're down to one option," he said. "We lift the Hercules. The window is tight. We put a pilot in that seat who can make a bad day choose not to kill us." He didn't say the pilot's name. He didn't have to. The crew chief had already moved to the door, and the gray-haired woman was already there. She listened to him the way professionals listen to each other, head still, eyes awake, no wasted nods. She gathered nothing, no coat, no dramatics, only herself, and walked into the weather. Riker rolled his eyes just enough to be seen. "This is going to be a train wreck," he muttered loud enough for agreement to find him. Agreement found him because fear prefers company. A wind gust pushed rain against the command center glass like a thrown bucket. Caldwell watched Ava Hart stop under the Hercules' wing and lay her palm on the wet aluminum. It was a small thing, almost tender, the benediction pilots give airplanes they intend to ask too much from. In the cockpit, she slid into the left seat, and the space accepted her the way a well-made tool fits the hand that knows it. She didn't force the checklists or rush the rhythm. Her thumb traced switches in an order that would look odd to a pilot raised entirely on screens. It wasn't the book's order. It was the order of someone who understood which parts of the airplane liked to be asked first. The maintenance crew cleared chocks. The prop arcs blurred into gray discs. Out on the ridge, explosions stepped closer together the way bad weather steps toward a runway. 2 minutes, the remote controller said voice level because there was nothing to be gained by letting it crack. "Get her in the air," Caldwell said. The order snapped through the headsets and down the stairs. The Hercules rolled. The runway was slick, the crosswind fidgety, the gusts unpredictable. The tower read off winds that contradicted themselves every 3 seconds. Hart kept the taxi slow and the turn on to centerline slower. She held the brakes a heartbeat longer than a younger pilot would have, letting the engines find their strain so the airplane could talk to her before she asked it to leap. When she released, Riker's laugh died somewhere around 80 knots. The old bird lifted into a lid of cloud that slammed shut above it. The base fell away. The building shook once more, then steadied. In the command center, a technician exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for years. Up in the weather, a different kind of flying began. Hart didn't fight the storm head-on. She went looking for its seams, those narrow corridors of relative calm that hide between ugly bands of rain and turbulence. Modern glass cockpits teach you to believe in the picture. Old airplanes teach you to believe in the air. Hart believed in the air. She trimmed with her fingertips and felt the tail stop arguing. She let the nose climb just enough to catch a gust as it turned friendly and then leveled before the gust remembered not to be. The altimeter twitched. The attitude needle steadied. She didn't comment. She flew. Seraph 1 winds are variable at destination, the controller said. Advisory only. We've got nothing reliable. Translation, you're alone in there. Copy, Hart replied without decoration. Her voice had the calm cadence of somebody who had done this enough times to have no use for adjectives. On the ridge, the team's world had shrunk to a muddy strip, bracketed by bad intentions. The landing zone was an afterthought of flatness. Angel is 1 minute out, someone said on the ground net, the old call sign returning to the air on its own. No one corrected it. The word felt like handhold. Hart broke out of the cloud with the ridge ahead and the strip a dark bruise on the earth. She kept her power steady when instinct wanted it up. She kept her mouth shut when lesser pilots would have filled the frequency with their nerves. The first tracer round reached up and wrote its opinion across the wing. The engine on that side coughed and sulked. Number 2's not happy, the flight engineer said. It doesn't have to be happy, Hart answered. It just has to be present. She brought the Hercules across the threshold with less margin than anyone wanted and more margin than anyone needed. When the engine finally gave up its argument, she didn't. She slipped the airplane with a touch of rudder and a tempering of aileron that would have looked like art if anyone had the leisure to admire it. The tires met mud, not with a shout, but with a low, forgiving growl. Short field work is not drama. It is geometry and respect. She had both. The rollout ended with inches to spare and a view of nothing but the drop-off. The ramp fell, and men who had been practicing how not to beg for years ran like men who had run out of practice. The crew chief counted helmets the way accountants count zeros. When the last one thumped aboard, Hart didn't whip the airplane. She asked it, and the airplane believed her again. Power on the 3 engines that still wanted to help, a swing that ignored the temptation to panic a back taxi done with the deliberation of someone who understands that time is elastic when you refuse to waste it. Seraph 1 rolling, she said, because sometimes a label is a handrail. The climb out was a fistfight you don't watch in public. The ridge fell away. The tracers lost interest. The storm resumed its argument with itself, and she resumed her conversation with the seams. The radio went quiet in that particular way radios do when men have put their fear down for a minute and picked their gratitude up with both hands. Back at the base, the ready room had lost its appetite for noise. Men who bet on modernity watched an old airplane thread weather they believed couldn't be threaded. Riker stared and didn't blink. He wasn't the first to learn that there's a difference between speed and salvation. They hit clear air 10 miles from home and 10,000 miles from where Riker had started his morning. The landing was ordinary. It was extraordinary because it was ordinary wheels down flare, aligned in with the centerline stripes reverse thrust the way it's supposed to sound. The Hercules taxied to the hard stand with the nonchalance of an elder who has outlived fashion. The ramp came down. The team filed off and did not scatter. They walked in a line to the nose and took their places the way soldiers remember they were taught to do. A grizzled master sergeant raised his hand in a slow, perfect salute to the woman who stepped down from the cockpit. One by one, his men followed suit. The gesture said, what words could not, the math worked. The minutes bought were enough. You brought us home. Inside the command center, Caldwell closed his palm over a manila folder he had requested an hour earlier and suddenly did not need. He picked up the room mic anyway. The base needed to hear it. The base deserved to hear it. Tower, this is Caldwell. Put me across the net. The chief controller glanced up, met Caldwell's C's through the glass and nodded. He pressed the key that made the entire wing an audience. Caldwell's voice went out steady, almost gentle. "Read the service record for contractor Ava Hart," he said. "The full record." The chief swallowed and did as he was told. Paper whispered. Then his voice carried more respect than breath. Name Hart Ava. Rank Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. Aircraft qualified C-130, C-5, C-17. Special qualifications, Master Navigator and Pilot. MC-130 Combat Talon Veteran. Original call sign Seraph 017 Special Operations Squadron. He paused, then added what the room needed. Operations Eagle Claw, Restore Hope Joint Missions, redacted. A collective intake of air moved the building. Riker flinched like a man discovering a wound he'd given himself. Caldwell took the microphone back. "Captain Riker," he said. Not unkindly, the call sign Seraph was given to the one pilot who could fly anywhere, land anywhere, and pull souls out of the fire when even God had stepped back. It is a title of respect, not a punchline. He nodded toward the tower. Clear her parking. Use her proper call sign. On the ramp, a dozen more salutes found their shape. Pilots from the hangars, crew chiefs from the shadows, maintainers with grease under their nails, one small line becoming two, then three, then a quiet throng. Riker pushed through them the way a man walks into a church when he needs to do something right. He stopped in front of Ava Hart, came to attention, and rendered the sharpest salute of his life. He couldn't find the speech to tack to it. He didn't need to. Hart returned it with a nod that held neither triumph nor scorn. It held acceptance. The work was done. There were no toasts in the club that night. There was a photograph someone printed from a controller's feed, a grainy frame of the Hercules on the ridge, a smudge of airplane on a strip that didn't deserve the name. A stapler pinned it to the briefing room board over a map that had gotten the weather wrong. No caption was needed. None was offered. The days that followed did the quiet work that proves what matters. The ridge where the landing had happened, bracketed on the coded maps by jargon and grid lines, picked up a new unofficial name, Seraph's Perch. It wasn't a joke. It was a locator of memory. Crew dogs started saying it to each other in the way men pass a standard that isn't written down. You meet at Seraph's Perch in your mind when you need to remember what right looks like. In the hangar, they found Ava Hart doing the unglamorous things that keep airplanes honest. She pulled a young airman under the Hercules wing and showed him how to inspect a hydraulic line without convincing yourself you had. "Listen to it," she said. "Feel for the lie it wants to tell you." It wasn't mysticism, it was craft. Caldwell sent a short memo that was more sermon than policy. It wasn't about the storm or equipment that had sulked. It was about how you treat the quiet people who have done the work before you were born. He didn't name Hart because he didn't need to. He wrote about hands that know and voices that don't need to be loud. He wrote about results in the strange immediate silence that follows a thing done perfectly. He wrote about humility as a tool, not a pose. The wing's noise level went down. Jokes didn't disappear. They simply found a better target than other people. The swagger that had once filled the ready room like smoke thinned. In its place came a different kind of confidence, the kind that looks like attention. Lieutenants started listening to crew chiefs who had seen airplanes broken in ways their computers didn't recognize. Crew chiefs started asking lieutenants what the mission needed before they told them what the airplane wanted. It wasn't a revolution, it was a realignment. Riker did the most difficult thing an ambitious man can do. He changed without making a production out of it. On rainy afternoons, you could find him in the simulator with kids barely shaving, saying the same words in patient loops. Don't chase the picture. Fly the air. Don't get louder when you're scared. Get quieter so you can hear. Judge people by their hands, not their haircuts. He never mentioned his own error unless a young pilot needed to see the bruise to remember not to make it. He also found his way to a place under the same wing where Hart liked to stand when no one required her elsewhere. He would arrive with a question and leave with an answer he had to earn later in practice. Sometimes the answer was a sentence, sometimes a raised eyebrow that meant, "You'll discover that for yourself today." As for Hart, she did not bask. The day the Hercules went back to sleep with the weather tame and the glass cockpits purring again, she turned in her clipboard and disappeared into the quiet smallness she preferred. You saw her in the maintenance shack with a thermos, rubbing a smear of grease between her fingers, the way a jeweler touches a stone. You saw her in the safety brief, saying nothing and making everyone else say less too. You did not see her at the podium. There are people who turn ordinary rooms into ceremonies just by refusing to be the center of them. On a Friday when schedules finally allowed, Caldwell walked into the ready room with a frame under his arm. He hung the photo of the ridge, the one that hadn't needed a caption, and added one anyway, because sometimes the next generation needs you to be unfairly clear. The brass plate under the glass read Seraph's Perch 4 June. Competence requires no announcement. He didn't make a speech. He stood there until the room noticed and then left without being thanked. Later, a crew chief straightened the frame by half a degree and smiled like a man who had seen half the world from the wrong side of a cargo door. Time, which eats most events for breakfast, didn't chew this one down. When new pilots checked in, Riker did not take them to see the shiniest airplane. He took them to the photograph and told them a story that never got a day older. The words were simple and never changed much. A storm came. The fancy things failed. A woman with quiet hands made an old airplane do what only old airplanes and quiet hands can do. A handful of men lived who would have died. Judged by calm and by results, he would say, not by age, flight suit, or volume. On the anniversary, a few maintainers walked to the far end of the ramp and chalked Seraph at a seam in the concrete only they could find without measuring. It wasn't graffiti, it was a map legend for people who needed to remember where to stand when doubt tried to get its voice back. The rescued team sent a plaque because warriors have to close a circle, a slice of aluminum, a strip of muddy sling, a line stamped by an old punch. When we had minutes left, you gave us more. It went on the wall under the photograph. If you didn't know, you walked past it. If you knew, you touched the metal, the way men who can't pray still have to do something with their hands. Caldwell found Riker one evening months after in the sim bay, the lights low, the screens casting weather across his face. You've been different, the general said, not as accusation, but as observation. I've been taught, Riker said. Most lessons hurt. That one healed something I didn't know was broken. Caldwell nodded. Keep the standard, he said, and when you forget, go look at the picture. They both did more than once. Ava Hart stayed long enough to make her leaving seem like a rumor. One morning she wasn't in the hangar and the thermos wasn't on the bench. No one announced it. Someone found a note taped inside a toolbox lid that simply read, check the safety wire twice. Hart had left behind better things than speeches. If you were to put your palm on that wing today, you might feel only aluminum and rivets and the warmth of sun stored there. But if you listened the way a pilot listens to air, you would hear the rest of it, the hush after the landing, the slow scrape of boots as men filed off alive, the unclenched breath of a base realizing it had just been taught. You would hear the simplest sentence a place can say to itself and still be honest, competence requires no announcement.